You ever seen a tattoo that wasn't supposed to exist? The voice cut through the low hum of the base cafeteria, sharp and careless, carrying just enough volume to turn heads without trying. Corporal Jason Briggs leaned back in his chair, one boot hooked over the rung, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth as he stared across the table. The afternoon light poured in through the tall windows, casting long bars of gold across polished floors and pressed uniforms, but it didn't reach the man standing quietly near the coffee station. Thomas Whitaker didn't look like much. Faded denim jacket, worn at the cuffs. Hands steady, resting loosely at his sides. He had the kind of posture that didn't ask for space, it simply occupied it. Briggs pushed himself up, chair scraping just loud enough to draw a few more eyes. "Hey, old man," he called, stepping closer. "That ink on your arm, you get that out of a souvenir shop or something?" A couple of younger Marines chuckled, the sound light, easy, untested. Whitaker didn't answer. He didn't even look at them right away. His gaze stayed forward, fixed somewhere beyond the walls, like he was listening to something no one else could hear. That stillness, more than anything, seemed to irritate Briggs. He closed the distance, boots tapping against the tile, and reached out without permission. His fingers hovered, then lightly caught Whitaker's wrist, turning it just enough for everyone to see. The tattoo was old. The ink had softened with time, edges blurred by decades, but the shape was still there, a circle, imperfect, enclosing 5 small points arranged with quiet precision. No lettering. No unit insignia. Nothing recognizable. "Yeah," Briggs said, louder now, lifting the arm slightly as if presenting evidence. "That's what I thought. Not in any corps registry I've ever seen." The room shifted. Conversation slowed, then thinned, like a tide pulling back. A tray clattered somewhere in the distance, then silence settled in its place. Whitaker's arm remained where Briggs held it. He didn't pull away. Didn't tense. His eyes finally moved, not to Briggs, but to the faint reflection in the stainless steel counter nearby. Calm. Measured. Unmoved. "You claiming something with that?" Briggs pressed, the edge in his voice sharpening. "Because if you are, you better be ready to back it up." A few Marines leaned in, curiosity outweighing discomfort. Lance Corporal Evan Cole folded his arms, watching with a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It was becoming a show now. An impromptu trial in the middle of a government-issued cafeteria. Whitaker let out a slow breath, almost inaudible, the kind that didn't signal defeat or defiance, just time passing. The fluorescent lights above flickered faintly, and for a brief second, the entire room felt suspended, like something unseen had pressed pause. Briggs tightened his grip just slightly, enough to assert control, not enough to be overt. "I asked you a question." Whitaker finally turned his head. His eyes were pale, clear, and steady, carrying a depth that didn't match the simplicity of his clothes. When he spoke, his voice was low, even, and carried farther than it should have. "You wouldn't find it in a registry. No challenge. No explanation. Just a statement, laid down like fact." The air shifted again. Subtle, but real. Somewhere near the back, Staff Sergeant Daniel Ruiz stopped mid-step, his attention catching not on the words, but on the way they were delivered. And for the first time since the exchange began, something about the quiet old man didn't feel ordinary anymore. Ruiz did not move closer right away, he simply watched, his boots planted near the edge of the room as the moment stretched thin and brittle, the kind of tension that did not come from shouting but from something far quieter and far more controlled, and it was that control that unsettled him most because he had seen it before in places where noise meant nothing and stillness meant everything. Briggs, unaware or unwilling to notice, let out a short laugh that bounced awkwardly in the silence and glanced back at the others as if expecting approval. "Not in a registry," he repeated, shaking his head, "that is convenient," and his grip shifted again, turning Whitaker's wrist a fraction more so the faded ink caught the overhead light, revealing faint lines within the circle that most would miss, lines worn down by time but still precise in their placement, too deliberate to be random. Whitaker's expression did not change, but his eyes flickered for just a moment, not toward Briggs, not toward the Marines, but somewhere distant, as if the shape on his skin was not a symbol but a doorway, and for a fraction of a second the cafeteria seemed to fall away from him entirely. Briggs leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough to make the moment feel personal while still being heard by everyone nearby. "You know what this looks like to me, sir. It looks like someone trying to wear something they did not earn," and that word, earn, lingered in the air heavier than the rest, drawing a few uneasy glances from Marines who suddenly were not as comfortable as they had been seconds before. Cole shifted his weight, the half-smile fading. As he studied Whitaker more closely now, noticing the lack of reaction, the absence of defensiveness, the way the older man simply existed in the space without yielding to it, Ruiz felt it then, a subtle tightening in his chest, not fear, not yet, but recognition trying to surface, something about the posture, the breathing, the complete disregard for the pressure being applied. And it did not match the story Briggs was trying to tell. "You got a name for that thing?" Briggs continued, tapping a finger lightly just above the ink, not quite touching it this time. "Or is it just something you thought looked cool?" A few scattered chuckles followed, weaker now, uncertain. Whitaker finally shifted his arm, not pulling it away but easing it back just enough that Briggs no longer held it, the movement slow, deliberate, controlled in a way that made it impossible to interpret as submission, and when he spoke again his voice remained level, almost quiet, but it carried through the room with the same weight as before. "It has a name," he said, pausing just long enough to let the word settle, "just not one you would recognize," and there was no arrogance in it, no attempt to provoke, just a statement placed with absolute certainty. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, and somewhere outside a distant engine rolled past, but inside the cafeteria no one moved, no one spoke. The moment suspended on the edge of something none of them could quite define. Ruiz took a step forward now, slow and measured, his eyes fixed not on the tattoo but on Whitaker's face, searching for something he could confirm, something he could anchor to, because instincts like this did not come without reason, and as he got closer he saw it more clearly, the way Whitaker's gaze tracked the room without seeming to move. The way his shoulders stayed relaxed while every line of his body suggested readiness without tension, and Ruiz felt a quiet certainty begin to form, something that did not need proof yet but demanded attention. Briggs opened his mouth to speak again, to push further, to press the advantage he believed he still had, but before the words could leave him, Ruiz's voice cut in, calm but firm, carrying a different kind of authority. "That is enough, Corporal," and the shift was immediate, subtle but undeniable, as the balance in the room tilted just slightly away from mockery and toward something far more serious, something that had not fully revealed itself yet but was already changing the way every man in that room was beginning to think. Briggs froze for half a second, not because of fear but because of interruption, the kind that did not fit his script, and when he turned his head toward Ruiz there was a flicker of irritation in his eyes. "With respect, Staff Sergeant, I am handling this," he said, his voice tightening as he tried to reclaim the ground he had been standing on just moments before, but Ruiz did not raise his voice, did not step closer in aggression. He simply held his position with a calm that carried more weight than volume ever could. "I said that is enough," he repeated, each word measured, leaving no room for interpretation. The cafeteria air shifted again, subtle but unmistakable, as Marines who had been leaning forward now straightened just slightly, sensing that whatever this was had moved beyond casual mockery into something else entirely. Briggs let out a breath through his nose, forcing a short laugh as he released the last trace of contact with Whitaker's arm. "All I did was ask a question," he said, though the edge in his tone betrayed him. "If he has nothing to hide, then there should not be a problem." But even as he spoke, his eyes drifted back to the tattoo, and for the first time there was hesitation there, not understanding, not yet respect, but the absence of certainty. Whitaker lowered his arm fully now, the fabric of his sleeve settling back against his wrist, the faded lines of the symbol disappearing into shadow, and with it the invisible pull it seemed to have over the room. Yet the silence did not lift, it deepened, as if something had already been set in motion that no one could stop. Ruiz stepped closer, slow and deliberate, until he stood within a few feet of Whitaker, close enough now to see the fine details others had missed, not the ink itself but the man wearing it, the stillness that was not passive but controlled, the kind that did not come from age alone but from years of learning when to act and when not to. And Ruiz felt a quiet certainty settle into place, something that did not need confirmation yet but demanded it anyway. "Sir," Ruiz said, his tone shifting, no longer addressing a situation but a person, "do you have identification on you?" The question was simple, routine on the surface, but the way he asked it carried a different weight, not suspicion, but procedure done carefully, deliberately, as if the answer mattered more than it should. Whitaker reached into the inside pocket of his jacket without hurry, his movement steady, unforced, and for a brief moment the faint scent of old leather and worn fabric seemed to drift through the sterile air of the cafeteria. He withdrew a wallet, the edges softened by time, and held it out, not to Briggs, not to the room, but directly to Ruiz. Ruiz took it with both hands, a small detail that did not go unnoticed by the Marines watching, and as he opened it his eyes scanned quickly, then slowed, then stopped entirely. The shift so slight that only someone paying close attention would have caught it, but Briggs saw it, and that was enough. "What is it?" Briggs asked, the confidence in his voice now thinner than before, but Ruiz did not answer immediately, his gaze fixed on something inside the wallet, something that seemed to pull his focus inward, narrowing the world down to a single point. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, louder now in the silence, and somewhere a chair creaked as someone shifted their weight, but no one spoke, no one moved. Every eye drawn to Ruiz and the stillness that had overtaken him. Slowly, carefully, Ruiz closed the wallet halfway, not snapping it shut but holding it as if it required a certain level of respect, and when he finally looked up at Whitaker, the expression on his face had changed, not dramatically, not enough for a casual observer to name it, but enough that anyone who understood rank, discipline, and the quiet language of the military would recognize it instantly as the beginning of something far more serious than anyone in that room had expected. Ruiz did not return the wallet right away, his fingers resting lightly against the worn leather as if he were weighing something far heavier than its contents, and when he finally spoke his voice had changed, quieter, but carrying a precision that cut clean through the tension in the room. "Where did you get this?" he asked, not accusing, not doubtful, but careful in a way that made the question itself feel significant. Whitaker met his gaze without hesitation. "It was issued," he said simply. And that was all, no elaboration, no attempt to convince, just a statement placed with the same steady certainty as before. Briggs shifted his stance, the earlier confidence now unsettled by the exchange he could not fully interpret. "Issued by who?" he pressed, stepping slightly closer again, but this time there was a fraction of restraint in the movement, as if some instinct he did not understand was beginning to hold him back. Ruiz exhaled slowly, his eyes flicking down once more to the partially open wallet, then back up to Whitaker, and for a brief moment something passed between them, silent, unspoken, but understood, the kind of recognition that did not need words to confirm itself. "Corporal," Ruiz said without looking away, "step back," and this time there was no room for argument in his tone. Briggs hesitated, just long enough for everyone to notice, before taking a single step backward, the sound of his boot against the tile echoing louder than it should have in the quiet room. Whitaker remained still, his posture unchanged, but there was a subtle shift now, something almost imperceptible in the way he held himself, as if the weight of the moment had settled into place rather than pressing down. Ruiz closed the wallet fully this time, careful, deliberate, and extended it back toward Whitaker with both hands, a gesture that carried more meaning than most in the room could fully grasp, but enough that even those who did not understand felt the change. Whitaker accepted it with a slight nod, nothing more, slipping it back into his jacket as if the exchange had been routine, ordinary, but the room knew better. Even if it could not explain why. "Sir," Ruiz said again, the word now unmistakably intentional, "I need to verify something," and without waiting for a response he reached for his radio, his movements controlled but carrying a quiet urgency that contrasted sharply with the stillness he had shown moments before. The device clicked softly as he brought it up, his thumb pausing over the transmit button for just a fraction of a second, as if choosing his words carefully before committing them to the air. "Command, this is Staff Sergeant Ruiz," he said, his voice steady but lower than usual, the kind of tone used when uncertainty meets protocol. "I need confirmation on a name." There was a brief crackle of static, then a response, routine, expectant, unaware of the shift that had already taken hold in the cafeteria. Ruiz glanced once more at Whitaker, then spoke the name clearly, without embellishment. Thomas Whitaker, and for a moment nothing happened, just the soft hum of electronics and the distant sounds of the bass beyond the walls, but then the line went quiet, not disconnected, not lost, just silent in a way that did not belong in a normal exchange. Ruiz's grip on the radio tightened ever so slightly, his eyes narrowing as he waited, and around him the Marines stood frozen in place, every instinct telling them that whatever came next would not be routine. Briggs swallowed. The sound barely audible, his earlier certainty now replaced by something unfamiliar. Something closer to doubt, as he watched Ruiz, watched Whitaker, and felt the balance of the room shifting further away from him with every passing second, and then, through the static, a voice returned, different now, sharper, carrying a level of attention that had not been there before. "Say that name again," it said, and the moment stretched, held, as if the entire base had just leaned in to listen. Ruiz did not hesitate this time, his voice steady but lower, as if the weight of the moment required precision. "Thomas Whitaker," he repeated into the radio, each syllable clear, deliberate, and for a second the world seemed to narrow to that single transmission, the hum of the cafeteria fading beneath the quiet tension that had taken hold of every person in the room. The response did not come immediately, and that absence spoke louder than any answer could have. Because in a system built on efficiency, silence was never accidental, it was chosen. Ruiz's eyes remained fixed ahead, but his awareness sharpened, catching every subtle shift around him, the way Briggs had gone still, the way Cole's arms had dropped from their folded position, the way even the distant conversations at the far end of the room had stopped entirely. Then the radio crackled again, sharper now. The tone no longer routine but alert. "Stand by," the voice said, clipped and controlled, and then nothing, just open air, an active line held in suspension. Briggs shifted his weight, a faint scuff of rubber against tile, and leaned slightly toward Ruiz, lowering his voice as if trying to reclaim some measure of control. "What is this about?" he asked, but there was no bite left in it, only uncertainty, the first crack in a certainty that had seemed unshakable minutes ago. Ruiz did not answer him, not out of disregard, but because his attention had moved beyond the room. Entirely, focused on the unseen chain that had just been activated, a chain that did not respond to rank on a sleeve but to something deeper, something older. Whitaker stood exactly as he had from the beginning, hands relaxed, shoulders at ease, his gaze neither confrontational nor withdrawn, simply present, as if he had seen this kind of moment unfold before and knew better than to interfere with it. The seconds stretched, each one heavier than the last, until the radio came alive again, not with a single voice this time but with the faint overlap of movement in the background, distant orders, a shift in tone that even the untrained ear could recognize as urgency held in check. "Staff Sergeant Ruiz," the voice returned, more formal now, more precise. "Confirm visual identification." Ruiz's grip on the radio tightened just slightly as he answered. "Elderly male, approximately late 70s to early 80s, 6 feet, light build, gray hair, wearing a denim jacket." He paused for the briefest fraction of a second, then added, "Tattoo on left wrist, circular, 5-point configuration." The description hung in the air, and for a moment the entire cafeteria seemed to hold its breath. The response came faster this time, immediate, as if the confirmation had unlocked something that had been waiting just beneath the surface. "Maintain position," the voice said, and there was something else in it now, something Ruiz had only heard a handful of times in his career, the tone used when protocol shifted into priority, when routine became directive. "Do not escalate, do not engage further, command is en route." The line clicked, but it did not disconnect, it remained open, alive, a silent witness to the shift that had just taken place. Ruiz lowered the radio slowly, his eyes moving back to Whitaker, and for the first time there was no question left in his expression, only recognition. Settling into place, Briggs let out a quiet breath he had not realized he was holding, his earlier posture gone, replaced by something tighter, more restrained, as he looked from Ruiz to Whitaker and back again, searching for footing that no longer seemed to exist. Around them, Marines who had once leaned in for entertainment now stood straight without being told, their instincts adjusting before their minds could fully catch up. The room no longer a stage for mockery but a space waiting for something larger to arrive, something already in motion. closing the distance with every passing second. The room did not return to normal after the radio call, it settled into something else entirely, a controlled stillness that felt deliberate rather than accidental, like the calm before a command is given, and even those who did not understand why could feel it pressing in from all sides. Ruiz did not move from his position, his posture steady, his eyes occasionally shifting toward the entrance as if measuring time against distance. Calculating something unseen, Briggs remained where he stood. But the edge had drained from him, replaced by a quiet tension that tightened his shoulders and slowed his breathing, his gaze drifting back to Whitaker more than once, searching for answers that the older man showed no intention of giving. Whitaker himself had not changed, not outwardly, his stance the same, his expression calm, but there was a weight to his presence now that had not been there before. Or perhaps it had always been there and only now was anyone noticing it, the way he occupied the space without effort, without demand, as if recognition was not something he needed. The low murmur of the bass beyond the cafeteria walls carried faintly through the glass, distant engines, a passing vehicle, the ordinary rhythm of a place that had no idea something had shifted inside one of its rooms. Cole cleared his throat softly, the sound small but sharp in the quiet, and glanced at Briggs as if expecting direction, but none came, the usual chain of reaction broken, replaced by hesitation. Ruiz lifted the radio slightly again, not to speak, just to listen, and the faint background chatter on the open line told him everything he needed to know: movement, coordination, a change in priority that did not get announced but was understood, a few Marines near. The back instinctively adjusted their posture, shoulders squaring, feet aligning, not because they had been ordered to but because something in the air demanded it, an unspoken shift from casual to formal that spread slowly but steadily across the room. Briggs noticed it too, and for the first time since the exchange began, he did not try to push against it. His voice, when he finally spoke, was lower, controlled. "Staff Sergeant," he said, choosing his words more carefully now, "permission to clarify the situation," but Ruiz did not immediately respond, his attention still divided between the man in front of him and the invisible line of command that had already been set in motion. Whitaker's gaze moved briefly toward the entrance, not with anticipation, not with concern, but with a quiet acknowledgment, as if he knew what was coming and saw no reason to react to it. The seconds stretched again, but this time they felt different, not uncertain, but inevitable, like the final moments before something arrives that has already been decided. Then it came, not as a sound at first, but as a subtle shift in the hallway beyond the glass, movement that carried intention, footsteps that did not hesitate, voices that did not linger, and the effect was immediate. Those closest to the entrance straightened further, their attention pulled without command. Ruiz lowered the radio completely now, his grip steady, his focus narrowing to the doorway as the presence outside drew closer, and in that moment, without a single word spoken, the entire room aligned itself around something none of them had yet seen, but all of them could feel approaching. The door did not slam open, it moved with controlled precision, but the effect was immediate and absolute. Every Marine within sight of it straightened instinctively, conversations that had not yet resumed died before they could begin, and the air itself seemed to tighten as a figure stepped through, not hurried, not hesitant, but with a purpose that did not need to announce itself. General Robert Hale entered the cafeteria without escort, without fanfare, his presence alone enough to shift the room into a different state entirely, the quiet authority he carried settling over the space like weight, steady and undeniable. Ruiz snapped to attention first, the motion sharp and automatic, followed by the others in a ripple that moved outward. From the doorway, chairs left slightly askew, trays forgotten, every posture aligning under a discipline that had returned without being commanded. Briggs followed a fraction of a second later, his earlier stance gone, replaced by rigid form, eyes forward, jaw set tighter than before. The uncertainty he had been feeling now sharpened into something closer to realization. Hale did not acknowledge the room immediately. His gaze moved past the lines of Marines, past Ruiz, past Briggs, and settled directly on Whitaker, and for a brief moment the two men simply looked at each other, the noise of the world outside reduced to nothing more than a distant hum. Whitaker did not move to attention, did not shift his posture to match the others, he remained exactly as he had been, calm, steady, present, and there was no challenge in it, no disrespect, just a quiet refusal to become something he was not. Hale took a few steps forward, each one measured, his boots striking the tile with a controlled rhythm that echoed softly in the silence, and as he closed the distance, something changed in his expression, subtle, but unmistakable to those who knew how to read it, the edge of command giving way to something older, something personal. Ruiz remained at attention, but his eyes tracked the movement carefully, aware that he was witnessing something that did not happen often, something that would not be explained in briefings or written in reports. Hale stopped a few feet from Whitaker, close enough now that the difference in their posture became clear, one standing within the structure of the present, the other rooted in something that predated it. The general's gaze dropped briefly to Whitaker's left wrist, to the place where the tattoo had been visible moments before, and then returned to his face. For a second, nothing was said, no commands given, no questions asked, just silence, the kind that carried more meaning than words ever could. Then, without turning to the others, without addressing the room, Hale reached for his own sleeve, the motion deliberate, unhurried, and as the fabric moved back along his forearm, the gesture itself drew every eye in the room, not because it had been ordered, but because something in the moment demanded it. Briggs felt his breath catch, not from understanding, not yet, but from the weight of anticipation that had settled into his chest, the quiet certainty that whatever was about to be revealed would change everything he thought he knew about the man standing in front of him, and in that suspended second, the entire room leaned forward without moving, waiting for the truth that was no longer hidden but not yet spoken. The fabric slid back just enough to reveal it, and the moment it appeared, the air in the room seemed to collapse inward, every sound fading into a heavy, absolute silence as General Hale's forearm came fully into view, the same circle, the same 5 points, aged but unmistakable, etched into his skin with the same quiet permanence. No one moved, no one breathed louder than they had to, because recognition did not arrive gradually. It struck all at once, clean and undeniable. Briggs felt it first as disbelief, his eyes locking onto the symbol as if staring harder might change it, might reveal some difference, some detail that would separate the two, but there was none. The lines matched, the placement matched, even the subtle wear of time seemed to mirror itself in a way that made coincidence impossible. Ruiz's posture did not change, but something inside him settled completely, the last trace of uncertainty gone, replaced by a clarity that required no further confirmation. Cole's arms dropped fully to his sides now, his earlier skepticism replaced by a quiet stillness, the kind that came when a story shifted from assumption to reality. Hale did not rush the moment, he did not speak immediately, he let the silence do what it needed to do, let the weight of the reveal move through the room without interference, and only when it had fully settled did he lower his arm slightly, not hiding the tattoo, but no longer presenting it, as if its purpose had already been fulfilled. His gaze remained on Whitaker, steady, measured, carrying something deeper than rank, something that existed outside the structure everyone else in the room lived within. "You still wear it," Hale said finally, his voice quieter than expected, but carrying across the room with absolute clarity, and Whitaker gave a small nod, the movement barely noticeable but enough. "Some things do not come off," he replied, and there was no pride in it, no emphasis, just truth stated plainly. The exchange was brief, almost simple, but the effect it had on the room was anything but. Because in those few words, something unspoken had been confirmed, something that did not require explanation to be understood. Briggs felt his throat tighten, not from fear, but from the sudden realization of how far off he had been, how completely he had misread the man standing in front of him, and for the first time since this began, he did not look at Whitaker directly, his gaze dropping just slightly as if the act of meeting those eyes now carried a weight he was not prepared to hold. Hale shifted his attention then, not abruptly, but with purpose, his eyes moving from Whitaker to Ruiz, and he gave a slight nod, a silent acknowledgment that needed no words, then to the rest of the Marines in the room, his expression returning to the controlled authority they recognized, but now carrying an added edge of something else, something sharpened by what had just been revealed. The room responded instantly, spines straightening further, breaths controlled, every man present acutely aware that the moment they had just witnessed was not routine, not common, but something rare, something that would not be spoken about casually, if at all. Whitaker remained where he was, unchanged, unaffected by the shift around him, as if the confirmation had not elevated him, but simply restored a balance that had always been there, and in the quiet that followed, no one questioned anymore, no one doubted. Because the truth was no longer hidden, it was standing in plain sight, shared between two men who did not need to explain it, and a room full of others who finally understood just how little they had seen at the beginning. No one spoke after that, not because they were ordered to remain silent, but because the moment itself demanded it, a silence that carried weight, understanding, and something close to reverence without ever being named, General. Hale let his gaze sweep the room once more, not searching, not questioning, but acknowledging, and when his eyes passed over Briggs they paused for just a fraction longer, not long enough to single him out, but long enough for the message to land without words. Briggs felt it immediately, a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with clarity, the kind that comes when a line has been crossed without realizing it. And he straightened further, not out of reflex this time, but out of intent, his earlier posture gone completely, replaced by something quieter, more grounded. Hale did not address him directly, did not call him forward or correct him in front of the others, because the lesson had already been delivered in a way far more effective than any spoken reprimand. Instead, the general turned slightly back toward Whitaker, and for a brief moment the structure of rank seemed to fall away entirely, leaving only two men standing across from each other, connected by something older than the uniforms around them. "It has been a long time," Hale said, his voice steady, carrying just enough weight to be heard without forcing itself into the room, and Whitaker gave the smallest nod, his expression unchanged but his eyes holding that same quiet depth. "Long enough," he replied, and that was all, no elaboration. No need to explain the years that had passed or the distance between then and now. Hale let out a slow breath, almost imperceptible, then stepped back half a pace, returning himself to the present, to the command he carried, and as he did, the room seemed to shift with him, the invisible line between past and present settling back into place. "Staff Sergeant Ruiz," he said, his tone returning to formal clarity. "Good judgment." Ruiz responded instantly, "Yes, sir," but there was more in his voice now than protocol, there was understanding, confirmation that what he had sensed had been real. Hale gave a slight nod, then turned toward the rest of the Marines, his gaze steady, not harsh, not forgiving, simply direct. "You will remember this," he said, not as a threat, not as a warning, but as a statement of fact, and no one doubted it. Briggs swallowed once, then took a single step forward, the movement controlled, deliberate, and when he spoke his voice was steady, stripped of everything it had carried before. "Sir," he said, not to Hale, but to Whitaker, "I was out of line." The words were simple, but they landed with more weight than anything he had said earlier, because they were no longer performance, they were acknowledgment. Whitaker looked at him for a moment, not judging, not dismissing, just seeing him, and then gave a slight nod. Nothing more, no lecture, no correction, just acceptance of what had already been understood. The tension in the room eased, not completely, but enough that the air felt breathable again, the moment having reached its natural end without needing to be forced. Hale adjusted his sleeve, covering the tattoo once more, not hiding it, but returning it to where it belonged, and as he did, the visible connection between the two men disappeared, though its presence lingered in the room. Whitaker turned slightly then, his movements unhurried, and began to walk toward the exit, not waiting for dismissal, not seeking attention, simply leaving as he had arrived, quiet, unnoticed until he was not. The Marines parted without being told, creating space without realizing they had done it, their eyes following him not with curiosity now, but with respect that had replaced everything else. The door opened, then closed softly behind him, and the room remained still for a moment longer before the normal sounds of the bass slowly returned, distant, muted, as if reluctant to break what had just been established. Hale watched the door for a second, then turned back to his command, the present reclaiming its place, but the imprint of what had just occurred remained, settled into the minds of everyone who had witnessed it, quiet, permanent, and in that silence that lingered even after the noise returned, the lesson did not need to be repeated, because it had already been understood. That respect is not something granted by appearance or demanded by voice, it is something carried, quietly, by those who have already earned it long before anyone thought to question it.